Greetings all, and thanks for spending some time with me as we each and all find our way through these tough times. If we haven't met, my name is Don Rollins, and I serve the two congregations who will be in on today's Zoom call. First, I'm the accredited interim minister to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Hendersonville, North Carolina, as well as contract minister with the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Athens, Ohio. I mention this because both fellowships will be using today's mini service as a way to experiment, a way to continue connections, but also as a way to make a bridge between two UU communities in this age of separation. Everything we do these days is an experiment. So let's see how having a common focal point works for the two congregations I serve. If you watched the video we created last week, you're wondering what happened with recording in the Hendersonville sanctuary. Two things. First, it's about the safety for the good people who are doing this production right now. And by switching to Zoom as our platform, they can do their work off-site. Same for me. Second, the Council from Denominational Resources regarding copyright laws is more restrictive than we realized. So as we looked at ways to include original music and meditations, etc., from you, Zoom is by far the friendlier approach. So we ask your forbearance for this stripped down version. Just a few announcements before we begin. Given both fellowships are at the peak of their stewardship campaigns, let me ask you to complete this year's pledge if at all possible. The virus has created expenditures we could not have seen coming. So any savings from lower utility bills may not cover the increases in staff, AV needs, etc. And you probably know what's next. This is the season when the two congregations seek your pledges for 2020 and 21. So see your congregation's weekly email communications for how to pledge. And for Hendersonville, you can also give online. Finally, to learn more about the Athens congregation, go to uuathens.org. For the Hendersonville folks, go to uufhnc.org. And to check out our denominational website and social media information, go to uua.org. Enough preliminaries. Again, keeping in mind the limitations we're working under. Let us take the time now to be together, to be one body and one people. To that end, I offer these words as our invocation. They say there is no community without walls to divide the beloved from the stranger, and this we do not believe. There is no common cause between the privileged and the marginalized. This we do not believe. They say these days of silent thunder all around us will separate us from who we are. This we do not believe. They say fear is wisdom, the other is always to blame, and joy is no more. This we do not believe. And they say that we are in the end times, that we will never rise from the depths. And I say again, this we do not believe. Of course, both congregations light a chalice to signify holy time, sacred time. So as I light the flame today, I do so in the spirit of resilience and resistance. I do so to affirm the holy that lives within each of us, that lives among us, and lives beyond us. On most Sundays, whether I'm in Hendersonville or Athens, we save space for the deep sharing of the transitions in our lives. In those moments, we risk being known by our valleys and our peaks. We ask for prayers and blessings from people who know us and care about us. We voice our grief and our tears. We talk about milestones reached. We invite laughter on the journey. So as with last week and going forward, using online technology is very different from our norms, meaning that there's a need to protect our and others' privacies. So that said, I can't offer blessings I've written to represent as many journeys as I can. So I'm going to borrow from the Hendersonville congregation's tradition of using stones and water to signify these journeys. Be a little awkward here, but it's good. It'll be fine. So I'm placing a stone for the one who is sighing right now, the one who is fretting right now. This stone is for the one who grieves the loss of routine, the expected. This stone is for the one who feels caged, cut off from nature. This stone is for the one who sees no end to these troubles, who lives only in the worst case scenario. And this stone is for the one who's taking all this in stride. This stone is for the one who even now is learning more and more about themselves, about others, about life. This stone is for those of you who are just too stubborn to surrender to this or anything else. This final stone is for you. This final stone is for all of us. And this stone is for all who are suffering, but we can't see them. And yet we know they're there. And yet we offer our feelings. I'm going to talk to you in a few minutes about something that is shaping my ministry right now, and that is looking at life and congregations through the lens of trauma. Think about trauma-informed everything, frankly, in terms of music, in terms of congregational life and governance. And this may not be the path that some boards, your boards want to go down. That's fine. But for me, there has been a transition. Once again, in my ministry and life, and that is, as I said, to be able to look at life through the lens of what's happened to folk or what's happening to folk, to let that be a guide to understanding them. Again, since we cannot do music, that's not the original. I've got a song that I wrote almost 20 years ago now, and in terms of thinking about things that are done to people. I want you to put yourself in that small bar in Columbus, on High Street in Columbus, where on a regular basis I come across this fellow whose name I forget, but I always called him Pilgrim. He gave me a song that talks about the various things that have gone on in his life. And in retrospect now, he was telling me about the things that have happened. He was telling me about his trauma. So this is called Pilgrim. Cowboy shirt and old work pants. John Wayne walking a Bogart stance. He's a June breeze. He's just passing through. An old hands around an old guitar. Corner of a corner bar. Singing every song he ever knew. He's a brother and he's a friend. He's a little lost, he's a little thin. Somehow he just gets along. He's a pilgrim in gumshoes, singing lonesome three-chord blues. Hey pilgrim, won't you sing us one last song? He can't hold to a dollar bill, never could, probably never will. But he says it ain't no crime just being poor. And if money makes this whole world go round, then it's who you know that makes you count. He says, I don't know. Guess I'm not for sure. He's my brother, he's a friend. He's a little lost, he's a little thin. Somehow he just gets along. He's that pilgrim in gumshoes, singing lonesome three-chord blues. Hey pilgrim, won't you sing us one last song? He says it ain't all that bad. You can't miss what you never had, and at least nobody can take your name from you. Wipes a tear on a dirty sleeve, shakes my hand and stands to leave. He's my June breeze, and he's still passing through. He's my brother, he's a friend. A little lost, he's a little thin. Somehow he just gets along. He's my pilgrim in gumshoes, singing lonesome three-chord blues. Hey, pilgrim, won't you sing us one last song? Pilgrim, won't you sing us one last song? The message I have for you is titled, When Trauma Comes Knocking, Lessons from a Virus. I was 15 when I accepted Jesus as my personal Savior. 18 when I took my first class at Circleville Bible College, now named Ohio Christian University. And I was 19 when I accepted my first call to a church. If you've heard me speak before, you will not be surprised when I tell you that I received a C for my first preaching course, and even then showed a talent for boring otherwise innocent people. And as I think about the syllabus for that class, we were tasked with writing short sermons on each of the books in the Hebrew Scriptures, starting with Genesis, which meant Adam and Eve. You know, my texts from that period, all of them are blissfully lost to history, but I still recall the conflicted feelings that I brought to the text. I wasn't so much troubled by its use to justify the doctrine of original sin. I was there. And what bothered me was nobody else in the class, including a fellow student who went on to be a prominent Ohio-based televangelist, none of us were asking after the couple's post-serpent welfare. For real, what did it feel like to be made in God's image, to be whole, to be beautiful, to be enough, and then shamed by that same Creator for the bodies that Creator once celebrated? What was it like to embrace and feel embraced by a loving parent God so quickly turned fickle, distant, even volatile? And how were Eve and Adam to keep faith? Faith in themselves, faith with one another, faith with a conditional God sent into rage because they chose the wrong fruit from the wrong tree. Decades up the road, that second of two creation myths holds no literal power for me. A liberal Methodist seminary has since introduced me to scholarship and mythology, and there's no turning back. But back then, I had no language for what I knew was true in my heart, if not my head. Talk all the sin and snakes and shame you want. But I wanted to say Adam and Eve's lives would never be the same from that moment forward. I want to break that down just a little more, because I now have a word for what happens to people when deep suffering comes their way. Suffering so profound that it divides their lives into two or more distinct parts, the befores and the afters. And that word these days is trauma. Trauma, the word, translates from Greek to English as a way to describe a physical wounding. But trauma, the experience left unresolved, describes any deep disturbance that overwhelms our resources to cope. And it causes suffering so intense in our bodies and our minds and our spirits that we cannot fully process what's going on in the now. Let me say that again, because that's my working definition of trauma. It describes any deep disturbance that overwhelms our resources to cope and causes suffering so intense that our bodies, minds, spirits cannot fully process it in the now. Back to that hard-earned C in preaching class. My still adolescent mind and heart were taken umbrage that a story so central to my theology of a fallen race, a theology of blood sacrifice on my behalf. That tradition had no time for suffering among God's first human creatures. No time to take stock of the trauma embedded in the narrative. Nothing that talks about the human piece of what went on in that mythology. Now, folks, I don't have to tell you, but you and I are witness and part of trauma of such proportions. There is no time for that rote theologizing that we did back at Bible college. And because as we who are privileged to have shelter, as we practice our retreat, there are our siblings in almost every corner of the planet who are suffering today. Some are dying, and yes, some are dead. And this is the backdrop of our lives. And while these realities, these traumas cannot be permitted to define our interior lives, we have to admit that over and over again, we are trying to find that shaky existential balance between staying sane and staying smart. Another scene change. Don't know for sure if I've mentioned it to you before, but over the years, I've taken time away from interim work to regain perspective. Because for me, church has a way of clogging up my spiritual arteries from time to time. So I've taken some breaks, which in my case has meant returning to Southern Ohio to teach junior high social studies in my old high school, time away to work with adjudicated youths, time away to counsel adults who are court-ordered to receive substance misuse treatment. And given the context of Central Appalachian poverty, and I want to stop to recognize poverty is a source of constant trauma all its own. But given that context, few of those students and none of those clients had escaped severe trauma, and most were either reliving it or looking to outrun it. And even in the classroom, I figured my job was about more than teaching to a test written for students living a world away from my kids. For me, it was about helping people learn how to learn from trauma, even when we're smack dab in its very middle. And so holding these two things, that strange experience back in Bible college and these other experiences of being with people as they go through severe trauma, I have some questions for you, really just one. Even as you and I are exiled from the familiarity of places and faces, are we learning anything? Will we be troubled long enough and deeply enough to see what's going on and think about what we think about it? I'm going to go first on this because that's a piece of your homework. But here's where I am with that question. What are the lessons? What I'm getting right now is another reminder that I will die, and I will die of something, somehow, somewhere. It's reminding me that I have to come to terms, if I'm to have joy in this life, with the fact that I will not always have life itself. I'm being reschooled in the art of humility before the people, places, and things that are beyond my control. I'm being asked legacy questions, from what I'm going to do with my money, to forgiveness, to conversations about things of ultimate importance, not just the day-to-day stuff. I'm thinking about church, and here I'm thinking about fellowship life with you two congregations. And I'm wondering this, I'm wondering why being vulnerable with one another is so rare in our gatherings. And I wonder now why we so often settle for the small and the easy and the predictable and the comfort. This virus is prompting me to count the phone calls to family and a few friends I need to make because I want to hear their voices. I don't want to read their words. I'm celebrating the simple moments with the person I love and the good soul that she's raising. And lastly, I'm wondering what kind of world awaits us when the virus subsides, and what good news will you and I have for those who have been most traumatized? I wonder for real, will our congregations matter in that kind of a world? And if yes, how do we get started now? If no, let's ask the question again. What will we do on the other side of this trauma? Another part of your homework is to start a journal, whether it's mental or otherwise, tracking your life in the midst of this pandemic trauma. What's your own list of thoughts and emotions, unfinished business, prayers, commitments? Or put it more simply, what is becoming more dear to you in this time? And what are you going to do about that? Quick review for those of you especially who are right-brainers. First, I'm trying to tell you that trauma is deeply embedded in the human experience, in those scriptures from which I drew back in the day. But it's also in our stories, in our art, in our history, in our music. Trauma may well be the currency of understanding life. And even when the most well-worn myths in ancient texts become new when we read through the lens of suffering, we're not always taught to look for that suffering. Second, trauma, as an uncredited sage put it, is when our hearts need more time to accept what our minds already know. It's a searingly painful intrusion on our normal. It's a breach so profound that our lives become divided between the before and the after. And then third, trauma is a teacher like none other, because I believe it distills the very essence of all we have been through, all the hurt we have absorbed and inflicted, and all that in the end will prove to be worth the space in the air that we have taken up. I've come to terms with the reality that we are all survivors. So back to that preaching class from the Carter administration. I can't help but wonder how that story might have read had Eve and Adam been given a couple lines, if they'd had an exit interview from the garden. And here's what I think. I think it would have been the first time God took a real good cussing. Again, remember copyright. So I'm kind of thrown back on some of my own material. By the way, if for any reason you would want to copyright the stuff that I do, please reach out, because again, this is my own stuff. Quick song. I am not known for happy songs. I write a lot of stuff that is pretty dense with pain. Yeah, but I got a song called Dark Harbors, and it talks about how it is that we walk through each other, we walk with each other through times we could not have imagined. And our benediction will flow from those same words. I will sail with you through dark harbors, through dark harbors. I will sail with you, and I will take your hand in lost valleys, in lost valleys. I will take your hand, and I will cry with you in the night. At the dawn we will rise up in flight. And in the dawn we will rise up in flight. I do promise you, my earthly days here, my earthly days here, I do promise you, I will be your friend in dark places, those hard places. I will be your friend, and I will cry with you in the night. And at the dawn, we'll all rise up in flight. Yes, in the dawn, we will rise up in flight. 'Cause I will sail with you through dark harbors, through dark harbors. I will sail with you. So we close this time together with these words. Yes, we are sailing with no harbors in sight. And yes, these valleys are lonely without the clasp of one another's hands. But the promise to spend our earthly days together, however constructed, that choice still stands. It still holds. So in these hard places, there are still friends. And to quote from that piece, when the dawn returns, we will all rise up in flight. Believe this, folks. Believe this. Until next time, I say blessings on you, blessings on all of us.